Welcome, and here we are in Parshat Nitzavim, and we'll start off with the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Okay, so we catching Moses in the middle of this final speech of his, or series of speeches of his, although it's all sort of one large speech, if I were to try and describe it accurately. And he's saying, maybe he's talking about them entering this covenant, this major relationship, a defined relationship with God, with their Creator. And he's saying at this point, maybe there's someone amongst you, having gone through these other nations that worship other gods, maybe there's somebody here who thinks, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to go into it. I'm going to go ahead and follow other gods, and I'll be fine. And he uses the word, to bless himself, that there's no big deal, and that he can do this. And then he says, Bishrirut libi elech. And this word Bishrirut, right, isn't so easy to understand. And the way Rashi is going to explain Bishrirut as Bermarit libi, what my heart sees, or what my heart conceives. And it's, as you'll see, let me keep going with the Rashi. Kamo, and then he gives another parallel word, right? And this is from Balak, Bilam's prophecies in Numbers 24, and it says Ashurenu. So you see the root Shrirut and Ashurenu, Velo Karov, right? So I think generally it's understood when he uses the word ro'eh, it means to see. But I'm wondering, because it means I see him, or I see it, but not near. So that could mean, of course, that what Bilam was seeing in his prophecy was not something that was going to happen soon. That when he says not near, he meant in a sense of chronology, in terms of time. So again, so here he goes with Rashi. Let me keep finishing with the Rashi, right? Ma sheli bi ro'eh. So this is right. So this is in interpreting the original Bishrirut libi elach. He says, what my heart perceives, I will do, right? Or perceives to do, or what my heart is showing me to do, right? I'm trying to find words that still are linked to ro'eh, to see, but make sense. So again, ashurena, I'd love to say maybe translated as conceive, right? In terms of seeing or perceive, right? I perceive it, but not close. And then he says what the consequences are. Moshe, right? Moshe Rabbeinu. Leman svot harava, right? So the word svot could come from a root like lehosif, right? Which would mean to increase, right? Or to add. And here we go. Lefi. So this is, of course, again, Rashi is looking at the roots of the words and trying to help us understand what this means based on his study of the roots, right? Lefi she'osiflo. So this is Moses speaking in the name of God, right? I will add to him pur anut, retribution. Alma she'asa ad hena beshogeg. What he did up until now, unintentionally. So in other words, this particular act he's doing intentionally, right? He's saying, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm going to do, and etc. And because it is such a violation, God, as part of that retribution, is going to add, as part of the tally of crime, what he did unintentionally, which essentially means out of ignorance. And we know, right, this is a universal principle. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, right? Isn't. So, yes, but there's a leniency with regard to how God judges us when we just aren't aware of what we're doing wrong. But that's why Talmud Torah keneged kulam. That's why the study of the Torah is equivalent to everything else. Because if you don't study Torah, then you don't know it's wrong. But if you study Torah, at least you're aware of what you're doing, right? V'hayiti ma'avir alehem, and I shall cause to pass over them, v'gorem, and to cause. Ata, now, this is with an ayin, ata, now, she'atzarfem im hamezid, that I will combine them. That is, I think he's referring to those sins that were done bishgaga, that were done unintentionally. I will add them im hamezid, right, with those sins done intentionally. The ipara mimenu, and I will gain retribution, right? I will gain puranut, right? Retribution from him. Hakol, everything. In other words, he's going to have to pay for all his sins he committed, even though when you do something unintentionally, like I said, it's quite possible if you don't repeat the violation, you could get off altogether. That there's certain grace. There's grace, right? So you're going to remove any sense of grace. V'chein tirgem onkelos, and that is how onkelos translates it. That is the Aramaic up here. And we'll keep going. Let's see. Bedil, this is the Aramaic, right? Bedil means so as to, or in order that. Le'osafa le, to add to him. Chat'e shaluta, right? Unintentional sins. Al zdanuta, on the intentional sins. So Onkelos takes into account the traditional interpretation of these particular verses, and he simply gives it as part of the translation. She'osiflo ani, that I will add onto him, right, for him, hashgagot al hazdonot. Rashi's translating the Aramaic directly into Hebrew onto the intentional sins. So he translates now, Rashi is going to translate the actual Hebrew here, harava. So rava, I think, means like, let's see how I translate it. Okay, I think, let me let Rashi just, I won't try to translate the word now, I'll just let Rashi explain it, right? Shogeg, he says that refers, the rava, remember, because the original verse says, Laman sfot harava al hatzme'ah. So there I did, obviously you can see the translation I provided, right? But let's see how Rashi's going to do it. Okay, shogeg. So harava refers to the unintentional. Shehu oseh, shogeg shehu oseh. Okay, the unintentional ones that he commits. Ka'adam shikor, like a drunken man. Shehu oseh shelo midat, like a drunken man who does things without awareness, without knowledge, without in an unmindful kind of way, right? So you can see that the sense of mindfulness, which of course is so well sort of explored and explained in Buddhism, is such an important piece here too, right?
So the only thing that Chabad does differently is it actually says that harava literally means drunk.
Really? Okay.
And then it has that comment.
Okay.
And one interesting thing about it said that I'm thinking about when it says commits as in a drunken state, but that's, it's unintentional, but it's the act of getting drunk can be intentional. I mean, even if you don't think you're going to get as drunk as you are, if you are, choosing to drink a lot or drink a certain substance or whatever, you're going to get maybe drunk so that you may, so you're actually putting yourself in harm's way. It's not as unintentional as, not knowing or not attending because of some other reason.
So he's saying, okay, it's one thing if you cannot, and of course later on in this particular parsha, there's a totally memorable little section where Moses says, the Torah is not in heaven. It's not in heaven where you have to go, who will go up to heaven and bring the Torah to us. He says it's not overseas where you have to say, and this is sort of the way he puts it, right? He says it's close to you. It's right there in your heart. You're either curious, anyone can study Torah. And you know, one of the greatest, absolute greatest rabbis that we ever had was Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva at the age of 40, right? If you haven't heard this story, I will tell it to you. It's, again, a memorable story. Rabbi Akiva was an ignorant shepherd. He was a shepherd, and he was also ignorant. And at the age of 40, for some reason, he got the bug. He decided he wanted to study Torah. So he quit his job as a shepherd and went off to study. And on his way, he met a group of his fellow shepherds, and they were sitting by a stream, let's suppose, just to set the scene, having lunch, okay? And they say to him, Akiva, where are you going? And he says, I'm going to study Torah. And they say to him, are you crazy? At the age of 40, you know nothing, and here you're going to study Torah? And Akiva, who was known, by the way, for all his parables, he had all these stories, okay? He said, do you see the stream that you're sitting by, and the tiny little place in the stream where the water is falling onto a rock? And you see how the water has created an indentation in the rock? He said, if water is capable of creating an indentation in a rock, do you think the waters of Torah are capable of making an impression in my brain?
That's pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
Very
So
nice.
there's just, so the truth is that the drunkenness is like not studying Torah. Your decision not to study Torah is in a sense, ignorance is in a way. He's comparing ignorance here to being in a drunken state.
Yeah,
That it's
but
equivalent. Yeah,
willful ignorance.
yeah, yeah. Well,
There was a lot
that's
of
the thing.
there was a lot of people there with Joshua that says, well, they said, I didn't say I will when we were at Mount Sinai. I didn't say I will. I kept silent. So do I have to obey all the commandments? I kept silent. And some of the others says, why should I worry about studying the Torah? I wasn't there. I don't care if my ancestors said we should study the Torah. I wasn't there. Why should I do that? Why should I do what they say? I mean, people were terrible, even in those days.
People haven't essentially changed, and that's the reason why this stuff is as relevant as it ever was. I'm not saying it doesn't require perhaps some modifications and adjustments, but nobody ever denied that, and that's why we have an oral Torah, because circumstances change and circumstances alter cases. But the truth is, I mean, that's why I'm thinking to myself that appreciation is like such a cornerstone of faith, that if you allow your heart, if you and by the way, I think appreciation is actually a mindful act. It's an act of consciously examining the reality around you and all the various multitudinous, elements of reality, and saying, wow, how fortunate I am. These things are happening. I was taking the dog for a walk this morning, and I was thinking about, obviously there's vegetation all around, and I'm thinking to myself, the miracle of the ability of plants to propagate, right? That there's such a life force in these plants, because while the sort of, let's say the common, I'm scared to use that word, because I'm aware of the fact that in many cases, there are various ways to propagate something, not just from seed, but that every plant has the means to propagate. And that is incredible when you think about it. That regardless of how you can deconstruct it and explain how it happens and what have you, and I don't know that we're actually capable of deconstructing it to that point, to understand every bit of this process. But nevertheless, the variety and also the incredible life force within plants, right? My mother used to cut a leaf from a violet, okay, from an African violet plant, and pop it in the soil. And from that cutting, we know that's one of the ways in which you get another plant. Because whatever it is, right? That sense of a need to come into existence, to propagate and to grow is so strong there, and just to be to feel that there's a need to understand this better, and to also, of course, find our place in all of this. Where does it really come? At the end of it all. At any rate, let me keep going here. So it's, these are hard words. I don't deny it, right? So I translated, right, reva as sort of watered. That's a word that's usually used, or quenched, right? And again, that's sort of, I appreciate, where Chabad's translation of it, and I didn't, I could check it and see if it has a direct translation of drunk, and it may well be, right? I think it's drunk because in the sense of how the alcohol in the drink, right, has overtaken this person, right? Okay, tzme'ah, thirsty, shehu oseh, and tzme'ah does mean thirsty, right? Shehu oseh midat uvadava. So this is the point that Rashi's making, is when you're thirsty, right, you long to do something, right? You make whatever excuses you want to make to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And he says, Shehu oseh midat, because he does it quite consciously. And this is the word that relates to tzme'ah, thirsty. He says, a desire, right? Desire. Or there's a word in English that's strong, lust, that's the word. He does it out of desire and lust, that he commits that. And that's considered intentional. Like I said, this is not easy stuff, to be able to accept and to be able to say, this is true, because it's really, I guess, can I say, damning in a way? So here goes. This is the consequence of it. Lo yoveh Hashem sloach lo. The Lord will not desire. This is this word. Let's take a look, make sure I have it. Ta'ava, right? There's that word. Ta'ava. Lo yoveh, right? Desire. The Lord will not desire to forgive him, to grant him slicha, right? To forgive him. And what this is implying, okay, there's a takeaway from this. Does God desire to forgive us? Does God have a lust to forgive us? And the answer is yes. Yes. But we're making it impossible. Ki az yeshan af Hashem. For then the anger of the Lord will be incited. And Yeshan, Rashi is going to explain. It's related to a word that means smoke, right? The anger of the Lord will be kindled, will smoke, the kinato, and his jealousy, ba'ishahu, in that man. And I know people don't always like translating kina as jealous, but it means jealous. And there's a reason it means jealous. And why are Rashi's going to describe, he realizes that this is very, very anthropomorphic, and he's going to refer to that. He's going to try and explain why such heavy anthropomorphism here in this verse. But the reason for the word jealous is that when we worship someone else, when we worship idols, right, which means replacing God with our object of worship, it's like someone who is married or has a loving relationship with someone, and that person then goes and falls in love with someone else while you're still in love with that person. And what are the feelings you have? It is awful. The feelings that you have when someone you love and you thought loved you goes and then turns their loyalty and their affection to someone else. It's one of the most painful experiences a human being can experience. It is devastating. And that's why it's saying jealousy in that sense.
I think the whole concept of God and mitzvot is a little anthropomorphic, because God wouldn't give us instructions if he didn't care if we followed them.
Correct. That's
and
so
caring,
true.
He wouldn't just give us instructions and say, well, I'm God, and it doesn't really, what you do doesn't matter to me. He's saying what you do does matter to me.
Correct. Right.
by merely giving the instructions, and that's caring as an anthropomorphic act.
Right. We associate it with human beings. Absolutely, Lauren. I agree. But I think you've totally got the dynamic. And by the way, to underscore what you are saying, right? There is something, again, forgive me because words start to, I'm trying to think. What's it called? I don't think it's deism. They analyze and deconstruct various ways in which one believes in God. And there's a belief, it's a type of belief where while you do believe in a divine creator, at that point you believe God has no interest in what goes, like the metaphor used is like God wound up a clock and it just, goes on ticking by itself. But there's no concern, right?
Well,
And I
why
don't know
would
if that's
God wind it
deism. I think
up?
that's deism. Well,
But why? Yeah, but why would God wind it up, or why
I-
would God
okay,
create if there
right.
was no?
Of course, concern. I understand. I'm just simply trying to explain terms. I'm not trying to obviously
Oh, I
argue for or
understand,
defend.
but I just don't think that makes sense.
Well,
I mean,
okay,
I understand that maybe people believe it,
right,
but
right,
it was an intentional act. If you believe that God created, that was, it wasn't, you don't believe it happened accidentally.
right,
You believe there was an intention.
correct. Okay, again, I don't want to argue the point. Please forgive me. I don't want to argue that point. I just want to clarify because what you were saying, and I said I wanted to underscore what you were saying, that giving mitzvot, believing in a system of mitzvot, is in fact underscoring the degree to which God has concern for the world, which is called theism, as opposed to deism. So, for example, Spinoza was a deist. At least that's the understanding of basically his philosophy. And that's why he was excommunicated, is because of his deistic philosophy. And basically, he identifies the universe with God. Okay, whereas we in Judaism, we believe that God, while the presence of God may pervade the world. I had a wonderful friend who used to say, so Spinoza was also a pantheist. And a pantheist is someone who believes, obviously, that the universe itself, this physical universe that we have and all that it contains, right, is God. That's God. Well, we are not pantheists. We are panentheists. And he used to say, because we believe that God is both in this world or this world and then some, right? That there is this transcendent element that is so important in terms of Judaism. So all I wanted to do was explain some stuff. I wasn't here necessarily to defend or argue against. I mean, I agree with you, Lauren. I think your point is, a good, compelling point, but I'm not here to try to defend anything or argue for, etc. Just to explain right now. Right. So let's get going. Yeah, no, we haven't finished the verse yet, right? V'ravtza bo kol ha'ala. So the entire it means Allah is the curse, right? The curse element, right? Will and I'm trying to think. Rovates is like to couch, right? It's going to come down on this person. It's going to cling to this person. And in fact, it's so interesting that Onkelos translates as vayid bakun, and the word dabek means to cling, to be. The word for glue is devek, right? So in other words, all this, there's another word they use for curse that sounds a little bit cleaner, perhaps. I don't know, but the point is and I'm trying to, again, forgive me. I just don't necessarily have it at the tip of my fingers. But anyway, okay, haktuva, the curse, haktuva b'sefer hazeh, that is written in this book. And of course, we read those curses. Umacha Hashem et shmo, and the Lord will blot his name mitachat hashamayim, from under the heavens. Whew. Heavy stuff. Okay, so I mean, clearly, right, this was set up by saying maybe somebody's going to think, oh yeah, no problem, I'm going to just go follow my heart and I'm going to practice idolatry. and nothing's going to happen. And so Moses is trying to say, using the literary, this literary device here, it's not going to be that way, and I imagine some of you can think about nowadays how people say, well, I won't do that and it's all going to be fine. And then it isn't fine. But look at this, look at the human nature. It's tragic. I mean, this is the definition of Jewish tragedy, of biblical tragedy, right? Is that people know, this is again from a professor I had at HUC, again, lessons that I just have never forgotten, where he described the difference between Greek tragedy and biblical tragedy, right? In Greek tragedy, if you look at the tragedy, I think it's Ulysses who winds, no, it isn't, forgive me. Oh, it's terrible. The guy who winds up, Oedipus, right? Oedipus winds up sleeping with his mother and killing his father, right? But the tragedy of Oedipus is that this is going to happen. It's going to happen. The gods have determined this is going to happen. He has no choice. The tragedy of Oedipus is he has no choice. It happens. Biblical tragedy is we have the choice. We have the choice. And the tragedy is we still do it. We can do it. We can overcome these things. We are able to control our lives. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but there are exceptions. And there was a proverb that used to say, the exception proves the rule. And we don't pay attention. We still go after our hearts. That's the tragedy, that we don't control ourselves.
Is that what's happening to the world today, Rabbi? That we don't keep the God says, keep the earth clean. We don't keep it clean. So he says, okay, those fires in California, there's water in the east. I mean,
You're talking about climate change. You're talking about climate change.
Yeah. We don't keep the earth clean. It's dirty. Yeah. We don't care. And that's wrong. That's why God is giving all this problems. He's saying, keep the earth clean. Otherwise, I'm gonna show you what to do. I mean, we got fire in California. We've got water in the south, and I mean, it's getting worse. The whole world is getting worse. And with the virus too.
Okay, Harlan, I'm going to stop you right there, partially because we're out of time, but also I have tried to control myself, knowing that I am capable of self-control. All of the speech I've been giving up to this point, and trying to let you derive your own, and try to avoid necessarily applying it or getting into political issues. I did not want to do that. Let me see what I can do. Okay, I think we have to stop here. This is a good place to stop. And I will mark that I guess we are not going to continue this, unfortunately. But God willing, who knows? Maybe next year we'll be able to do that. And I'll put this marking in here. We'll do the verse again. And we're actually at the Rashi. And I'm sorry I have to stop here, but I do. So I'm going to stop the share and say farewell to those who have been actually sharing this recording with us, and thank them, and see you soon, I hope, possibly as early as Sunday.